It was supposed to be a weekend to reconnect. Just the two of us. Rob had even suggested we leave my car at home. "Let's take one car. Less hassle," he'd said. At the time, it felt sweet, coordinated, intimate. Now, standing alone under the flickering fluorescent lights of a gas station on Sunset Boulevard, soaked to the skin and holding a useless umbrella that had turned inside out minutes ago, I saw it for what it truly was, the first domino in a perfectly staged exit strategy. 40 miles from home. No car. No shelter. No explanation. Just 20 minutes earlier, Rob had looked me dead in the eyes over dinner and said, "Nina, I think we need some space. This isn't working anymore." Then, he stood, left cash on the table, and walked out. By the time I made it across the street, heels in one hand, clutching my purse in the other, his BMW's taillights were already dissolving into the storm. I remember watching them disappear like they were taking my entire sense of reality with them. It wasn't just the abandonment. It was how casual it all felt. Like he was checking out of a hotel room. Not ending an 8-year relationship. Like I was an oversight in his calendar. Something to reschedule or erase entirely. I had $47 in my account. Not because I was careless, but because we'd agreed. His word. Agreed. To pool our finances. He handled the budgeting. Said it was easier. More efficient. That he'd take care of it. So I didn't have to worry. And I didn't. Not until now. My phone buzzed in my pocket. 2 missed calls from my brother. A string of messages from my office. Nothing from Rob. No apology. No clarification. Just silence. As if I'd been deleted. The teenage clerk behind the counter gave me a wary glance. Unsure whether to call security or offer me a towel, I offered a weak smile in return. Trying to look composed when everything inside me felt shattered. I should have seen this coming. The signs were there. Disappearing phone calls. Late nights at the office. Sudden defensiveness over texts I never saw. But I hadn't wanted to believe it. I told myself we were just going through a rough patch. That we'd bounce back like we always had. I even packed lingerie I hadn't worn in years. Thinking maybe, I could still fix us. Now I stood in a convenience store that smelled like burned coffee in desperation. Realizing this wasn't a crack in the relationship. It was a demolition. I pulled out my phone again. Opened our banking app. I'm not sure what I expected. Maybe a small comfort. A shred of stability. Instead, I found the final confirmation. Our joint account had been emptied hours earlier. Nearly $3,000 gone. Withdrawn from an ATM while I was at the salon getting my nails done for our romantic evening. A clean sweep. No money. No car. No plan. Just me and the storm. But something strange happened in that moment. A shift. I stopped shaking. My breath slowed. And somewhere beneath the shock, the rage, the heartbreak, something steadier took root. Clarity. He thought he left me powerless. But he forgot who I used to be before the dimming began. Before the constant compromise. Before I started asking permission to be myself. Rob didn't just walk away from our marriage that night. He set something else in motion. Something he couldn't control. And he's about to find out that the woman he left at the gas station isn't the same woman who followed him into that steakhouse. Not anymore. The morning after the storm was startlingly bright. I woke in the house Rob and I had shared for 5 years. In a bed that still smelled like his cologne. With my soaked dress from the night before hanging limp over the back of a chair. But I didn't cry. Not that morning. Instead, I opened his closet and noticed half his clothes were gone. His favorite suits. Cufflinks. His overnight travel bag. His watch case. Once lined with carefully arranged pieces. Sat eerily empty. I stood in silence. Absorbing the full weight of what I had missed. This wasn't a breakup. This was an extraction. I moved to his office next. At first glance, it looked undisturbed. But Rob had always been meticulous. Too meticulous to leave a cabinet unlocked unless he wanted something found. Inside, I discovered the first crack in his polished narrative, a thin folder labeled VK, personal. VK. Vanessa Kim. The woman I had been trained not to question. Inside were printouts of apartment listings, auto insurance quotes, business class travel receipts, one of which matched the date of our supposed couple's retreat. There was also a vehicle registration application, not in his name, but in hers. It was the kind of documentation you gather when you're not planning a break, but building a new life. For a few seconds, I couldn't breathe. Not because of the woman. Vanessa was just a symptom. What broke me was the cold, administrative thoroughness of it all. There was also a draft email buried in his desktop's trash folder. It was clinical in tone, as if written by an HR manager cutting loose a low-performing employee. No sentiment. No accountability. Just a suggestion that I embrace this opportunity for growth and independence. I read it twice. It took until the third reading to realize something horrifying. He never intended to send it. It wasn't a goodbye letter. It was a psychological escape hatch. For him. I moved to our shared home office computer and started digging deeper. The browser history was wiped clean. But I knew where to look. In a hidden folder, I found PDFs of our joint bank statements going back 6 months, each one marked with yellow highlights, days I'd checked the balance. Patterns of spending. ATM locations. He had studied me like an algorithm, trying to predict the best time to pull the plug. Every detail of my emotional breakdown had been pre-calculated. This wasn't a panicked exit. It was a hostile takeover with me positioned as the liability to be quietly liquidated. By the time I reached the file marked financial adjustments, contingency, I was no longer shocked. Just steady, focused, cold. In the way someone becomes after they've finally stopped questioning their own reality. Rob hadn't just left our marriage. He'd outmaneuvered it. Drafted the terms, protected the assets, repositioned the narrative, and for months, I'd been living inside the shell of something that looked like love but functioned like strategy. I wasn't just betrayed. I was restructured. He wore the mask of a husband while setting the stage for a seamless transition, leaving me without access, without funds, and without a clue until it was too late. But here's what Rob forgot. I may have been written out of his business plan, but I'm not an oversight. And while he's out there thinking the pieces are already in place, he doesn't know that the woman he underestimated just uncovered everything, and I'm no longer playing by his rules. It was nearly 10 p.m. when he walked in. The gas station door chimed with a tired groan, barely audible over the rain hammering the metal roof. I had just poured myself a cup of bitter coffee that tasted like regret and old receipts when I saw him. Tall, deliberate, rain streaking off his jacket in clean lines. He scanned the room like he was trained to do it. Slow, systematic, calculating exits and angles. He didn't walk like a man running errands. He walked like someone who always expected the worst and was prepared to handle it. His eyes landed on me, and I could tell the recognition clicked before he said a word. Nina Caldwell. His voice was low, calm, edged with concern. He blinked. It took a moment to place him, but then it hit me. Marcus Thompson. I'd seen him at a few of Rob's company events. Holiday parties mostly. Always on the edge of the crowd. Polite but never overly familiar. Rob had mentioned him briefly once or twice. Described him as just one of our outside consultants. Security. I'd assumed. I had no idea just how much that title encompassed. He approached slowly, maintaining a respectful distance. "Are you okay?" he asked. His tone free of pity. Free of performance. It was a simple question. But no one had asked me that all night. not in a way that actually waited for an honest answer. My husband, I started. Then stopped. The words caught in my throat. It felt absurd to call what Rob had done a disagreement. It wasn't an argument. It was an execution. Marcus tilted his head slightly, the way a trained observer does when they're reading between the lines. He left you here, he said. Not as a question, but a deduction. I nodded. He looked out at the storm, then back at me, and something in his expression shifted. The polite social mask slipped just enough to reveal what lay beneath professional judgment. Not of me, but of Rob. Where do you need to go? He asked. Home, I whispered. Pinewood Hills. But I can't. I lifted my phone. Useless now that my accounts were frozen. My credit cards disabled. I didn't need to explain. He understood. Marcus didn't react with shock. He didn't offer platitudes. He processed, assessed, then made a decision. I can drive you, he said. Simply, no strings, no expectations. Sometimes people need help. And tonight, you need help. I stood frozen. Not because I didn't trust him, but because I wasn't used to being offered kindness without condition. Rob had spent years teaching me that favors came with terms, that gratitude meant indebtedness, that asking for help meant weakness. But Marcus didn't speak like a man offering a lifeline. He spoke like someone handing over dignity and expecting nothing in return. As he moved to the coffee station to give me space, I caught my reflection in the security mirror above the register. I looked like a woman who'd been discarded. But behind the smeared mascara and rain-slicked hair, I saw something else starting to flicker. Not desperation. Not panic. Anger. Not the helpless kind. The righteous kind. The kind that starts movements. The kind that changes destinies. Rob had hoped to leave me broken. But this stranger, this man with calm eyes and a steady voice, had just handed me the smallest thing I'd forgotten I needed. Choice. And for the first time in years, I made one on my own. Thank you, I said, looking Marcus straight in the eye. I'll take that ride. And just like that, the woman Rob tried to erase took her first step toward rewriting everything. By Saturday morning, the rain was gone, but the storm Rob left behind that had only just begun. I didn't cry, not when I saw the empty closet. Not when I found the emails. Not even when I realized my marriage hadn't just ended. It had been quietly dismantled while I was still living in it. I cried later. Of course. But that morning, I moved with clarity. I made one call. Patricia Walsh answered on the second ring. Her voice, equal parts surprise and concern. We hadn't spoken more than a handful of times over the past few years. Occasional comments on social media. A holiday card or two. But I knew she was now one of the most respected family law attorneys in Los Angeles. Patricia. It's Nina. I need legal advice. Fast. She didn't hesitate. Are you somewhere safe? Yes. Good. Don't go anywhere. I'm coming to you. An hour later, she stepped into my kitchen. Sharp blazer. Designer jeans. Leather briefcase in one hand and legal fire in the other. Show me everything, she said. I walked her through the timeline. The abandonment. The account balances. The folder labeled VK, personal. The empty drawers. The discarded draft email. She took notes like a surgeon in triage. Precise. Detached. But deeply attentive. Then I showed her the most important piece, the 6 months of financial records Rob had tried to hide. Marked. Analyzed. Tracked. It wasn't just deception. It was design. When I finally stopped talking, she looked at me with something that wasn't quite pity. It was respect. This is good, Patricia said. He blinked. I'm sorry. How is any of this good? Because he made a critical mistake, she replied, tapping the documents. He documented his intentions. In California, you cannot secretly prepare for divorce while pretending to be invested in the marriage. That's called dissipation of marital assets, and it's illegal. Then she dropped the next revelation. Nina. I looked up Henderson Construction on the drive over. Rob's been lying to you about the business. It's not a struggling family firm. It's a multi-million-dollar operation. They won a $40 million state contract last year. That business is worth a fortune. The breath left my lungs. He'd spent years telling me we had to live lean. That business was unpredictable. That we needed to be careful. Meanwhile, he was hiding wealth I never even knew we had. Patricia opened her tablet and outlined the strategy with the clarity of someone who'd done this before. And won. Step 1. Freeze all joint accounts and credit lines. Step 2. File for legal separation immediately to halt any further dissipation of assets. Step 3. Initiate a forensic audit of Henderson Construction, Rob's personal finances, and anything tied to Vanessa Kim. Step 4. Document everything. Every expense. Every communication. Every missing item. I was no longer a deserted wife. I was now a party to a legal battle. One with evidence, leverage, and a team. Rob thought leaving me stranded at a gas station would buy him time. Make me spiral. Keep me weak. But he had underestimated me. More importantly, he had underestimated the power of a woman with nothing left to lose. And the receipts to prove it. As Patricia packed up her briefcase, she paused and looked at me seriously. This won't be easy, she said. Men like Rob don't give up control without a fight. I met her gaze evenly. Then it's a good thing I'm done asking for permission. The first time I saw Rob again, he was dressed in a new navy suit and a silk tie I didn't recognize. Likely something Vanessa had picked out. He sat next to a power attorney whose reputation Patricia knew well. This wasn't someone who took on divorce cases for sport. This was a specialist in image preservation and financial redirection. In other words, the kind of lawyer you hire when you're trying to keep your secrets buried and your money untouched. But I wasn't there to argue emotion. I was there with facts. I didn't flinch when we were called in. I didn't search his face for answers. I already had them. What I needed now was acknowledgement. Not from him, but from the law. Patricia stood with the kind of poise that made even the clerk stop typing. She spoke calmly, but every sentence landed like a controlled detonation. She outlined what had happened: a sudden disappearance. Financial accounts drained without warning. A wife left with less than $50 and no access to transportation or legal counsel. While the husband, Rob Caldwell, quietly moved assets into shell corporations and began constructing a new life with another woman. When Rob's attorney attempted to counter, he claimed I was exaggerating. He said Rob had always been transparent, that I had been given options and choices. But then came the records. Emails. Transaction logs. Property documents Rob thought he had buried under names and companies. Travel reservations made weeks before his staged dinner walkout. A financial trail that told a very different story from the one he tried to perform under oath. The judge listened with growing discomfort. Then she turned to Rob with a directness that made the entire courtroom still. "Mr. Caldwell," she said, her tone sharp and unwavering. "You can't have it both ways. Either your wife fabricated an entire portfolio of documents and evidence, or you've deliberately misled this court. Which is it?" He shifted in his chair, adjusted his tie. But the damage had been done. The performance had cracked. The ruling was swift. All marital assets were frozen immediately. Rob was ordered to return more than $100,000 in withdrawn funds to a neutral account. I was granted exclusive use of the home we once shared, along with temporary spousal support in the amount of $4,000 per month. From that moment on, All communication between us was required to go through our attorneys. I didn't need to look at him to know what he was feeling. The silence on his side of the courtroom said more than any outburst ever could. He hadn't expected resistance. He certainly hadn't expected preparation. But I had learned something powerful in the process of being erased when someone tries to reduce you to silence. Your greatest weapon is not anger. It's evidence. I walked out of that courtroom not as a woman scorned, but as a woman redefined. Not on his terms. Not under his control. Rob thought this hearing would be a formality. What he didn't realize was that it was the beginning of a reckoning. And for the first time, I wasn't defending my worth. I was claiming it. It was a Tuesday morning when Diane Caldwell knocked on my door. She didn't call first. Didn't text. Just showed up like it was any other day. Carrying a plastic-wrapped bundle of cookies and a look of manufactured concern. Her voice was soft when I opened the door. "Hi. Sweetheart. I was in the neighborhood. Thought I'd check in." Of course she was. I let her in because, frankly, I wanted to see what angle she'd take. Diane had always been polite in that tightly composed, country club kind of way. Warm smiles at charity galas. Firm handshakes with just a hint of judgment beneath them. She had never raised her voice. She never needed to. Her power wasn't in what she said, but in how she suggested, layered in tradition, propriety, and unspoken debt. She sat down on the couch like she'd done it 100 times before, placed the cookies on the table, and exhaled with what I can only describe as performative grief. I can't believe it's come to this," she said, shaking her head. "Rob is devastated." I said nothing. I just watched her. Let the silence expand until she had no choice but to fill it with the real reason she came. "You know how hard this is for our family. The business has worked so hard to maintain its reputation, a legal battle. The press, it doesn't just affect Rob. It affects all of us. The company, the investors, the legacy." There it was. This wasn't a visit. It was an intervention. A mission dressed in nostalgia and soft guilt. The cookies, I realized, were a prop. She wasn't here for clarity. She was here to convince me to walk away, to make it all disappear quietly, like a scandal swept under a Persian rug. "Nina, I know you're hurt," she continued, her voice low and careful, "and I know things didn't end the way any of us wanted. But do you really want to drag this into court? Is this who you want to become, that line hung in the air like smoke? Is this who you want to become? As if protecting myself, asserting my legal rights, and demanding transparency made me less respectable, less appropriate." She leaned in slightly, her tone softening. "You were always like a daughter to me. I know you don't want to ruin what Rob built, or tarnish what your marriage once was." That's when it hit me. Not just what she was saying, but what I had allowed for years. I had played my role so well. The supportive wife, the agreeable daughter-in-law, the woman who kept the peace and kept her opinions quiet. I had stood next to Rob at galas and board dinners while he presented a version of us that was clean, united, whole. And Diane had helped maintain that illusion. But now I wasn't a team player. Now I was a liability. I stood slowly, gently picking up the plate of untouched cookies and placing them back in her hands. "Diane," I said, "I appreciate you stopping by, but this conversation isn't going to happen." Her smile faltered just enough to reveal the crack underneath. "I'm not trying to fight with you," she said quickly. "I know," I replied. "You're trying to convince me, but you don't need to. I'm clear on where I stand, and I think, deep down, so are you." There was a long pause before she rose, gathering her purse and composure in the same swift motion. "If you change your mind, you won't." She nodded tightly, walked to the door, and left without looking back. I didn't cry when I closed the door. I didn't shake. Instead, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Clean. This wasn't just about Rob anymore. It was about cutting the whole system loose. The one that expected my silence. My patience. My sacrifice. And now that I had nothing left to lose, I finally had something far more valuable. Boundaries. What began as a betrayal ended up becoming a full-blown forensic excavation. And the deeper we dug, the more obscene the numbers became. Patricia brought in a forensic accounting team, specialists who had seen every variation of financial deceit, offshore laundering, hidden trusts, asset shielding under friends' names. They were meticulous, methodical, and far too experienced to be fooled by Rob's clean spreadsheets. Within weeks, the reports came back, and they read like the blueprint of a double life. Rob hadn't just moved on. He had moved millions. $12 million. That was the estimate of the concealed empire he built behind my back. Properties in Arizona, Miami, and even a luxury beach villa in Costa Rica, all purchased quietly through shell corporations, using marital funds that had never been disclosed. He hadn't just hidden money. He had erased it from view, rerouting capital through investment accounts opened under Vanessa's name, set up to trigger payouts that would begin once the divorce was finalized. The house I thought was our future, just one asset in a network built entirely without my knowledge. The real insult, he used the budgeting trust I had shown in him, my belief that we were being careful, as a cover to stash millions in real estate portfolios I'd never even heard of. When we presented the findings in court, the silence was deafening. I sat there, composed in a navy sheath dress and minimal makeup, and watched the judge's face tighten as she read the summary page. It wasn't just deceit. It was fraud. On every level. Rob didn't just abandon a marriage. He attempted to financially erase his wife while constructing a new life on top of her trust. And then, justice finally had its turn. The court ruled in my favor. Not out of pity. Not because I cried. But because I came prepared. With numbers. Timelines. And evidence that couldn't be explained away. I walked away with $6 million in divided assets. The marital home was awarded solely to me. I was granted monthly spousal support for the next 5 years, enough to ensure I would never again be financially silenced. All legal fees were to be paid from Rob's holdings. And, most significantly, the court required him to sign a public acknowledgement of financial misconduct, to be entered into the official record. It wasn't a headline, but it was a stain. And in his world, his image-obsessed, reputation-driven world, that mark would follow him longer than any press release. I didn't celebrate. Not outwardly. There was no champagne toast. No social media post declaring victory. But that night, I stood barefoot in the center of the living room, my living room now, and looked around at the space he tried to use as leverage. And for the first time in a long time, it didn't feel like a memory of what we had. It felt like a clean slate. Rob had calculated every move, every exit, every asset, confident I wouldn't know where to look, let alone fight back. He bet on silence, on shame, on exhaustion. He lost. And while his empire of illusion unraveled in spreadsheets and court filings, I stood at the center of it, not as his leftover, but as the legal equal he never expected. What he tried to bury became the very thing that built my foundation, because truth, once revealed, doesn't just destroy lies. It rewrites power. The paperwork was final. My name, Nina Caldwell, stood alone again. No hyphen. No attachments. Just mine. Clean. Whole. Reclaiming my maiden name wasn't just about identity. It was about restoration. About drawing a line between who I had been under someone else's control and who I had become standing firmly in my own. I didn't vanish into quiet comfort or run from the mess. I did something Rob never expected. I used the wreckage to build something stronger than anything we had ever built together. The Elena Caldwell Foundation was born 6 months after the divorce decree. Named after my grandmother. A woman who had raised 3 children on a seamstress's wages and still had enough strength left over to teach me how to read by candlelight. The foundation's mission was simple: help women escape financial abuse before it turned into a legal coffin they couldn't crawl out of. We funded legal aid, provided emergency housing grants, and partnered with forensic accountants to uncover the money trails that keep too many women trapped in silence. Meanwhile, the graphic design business I had shelved during my marriage found new life. Word of mouth spread faster than I expected. And soon, my name was on branding decks for everything from indie startups to sustainable fashion lines. But what made the work different now was simple. It was mine. Entirely. No one else's credit. No one else's control. I started speaking at legal advocacy events. Not for applause, but to arm other women with the tools Rob never expected me to find. I wasn't the cautionary tale anymore. I was the proof of what happens when a woman refuses to disappear. Then came the news I didn't chase, but quietly welcomed. Rob was under federal investigation for tax evasion. Turns out, the same offshore accounts he used to hide money from me were also used to hide money from the IRS. What began as a family law case became the thread that unraveled the entire scheme. He was indicted, convicted, and sentenced. Henderson Construction. The empire he fought to protect was sold in chunks to cover mounting legal costs. Vanessa disappeared from public view. Her name erased from company filings and social media. I didn't seek revenge, but I did believe in consequences. And they came. With perfect timing. A full year after the night Rob left me at that gas station. I drove past it again. It looked smaller than I remembered. The same flickering fluorescent light above the pump. The same cracked pavement along the curb. But this time, I wasn't wet, lost, or uncertain. I didn't stop. I didn't need to. I just rolled down the window and let the breeze hit my face. That place, once the backdrop of my lowest moment, had become something entirely different. Not a symbol of abandonment, but the marker of my return. I wasn't the woman crying in the rain anymore. I wasn't the woman waiting for someone to come back or explain. I had stepped into the fire, walked through every lie, every smear, every silence, and come out not just alive, but whole. And now I was the number women saved in their phones when they needed a way out. Now I was the call that never asked, "Why did you stay?" but instead said, "Here's what we do next." Because survival isn't the end. Becoming the woman you were never supposed to become, that's the real victory.